You're listening to Bottomshelf Bitcoin, episode 16.
Relax. Enjoy your coffee. Okay. Good morning, everyone. Take a chill pill. What is it? Okay.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Bottomshelf Bitcoin, the podcast that puts Bitcoin knowledge within everyone's reach. As always, I'm your host, Josh Humphrey, and today I am joined by another podcaster, Ansel Lindner, who hosts the Bitcoin and Markets podcast, and he also has another project, if you are a patron of his, called Bitcoin is Freedom. And he does that with another guy named Jeff, who unfortunately couldn't be with us today, but we're going to be talking kind of about crypto anarchy and kind of what that looks like. So, Ansel, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Josh. It's a pleasure to be on, and I love all the new content creators coming out right now, and especially the ones that are centered around doing your own research, making all this accessible to people. So, love the show.
Well, thanks. Your show actually was kind of one of the inspirations for me to start my show, actually, because I was listening to your stuff. Your Bitcoin and Markets is really nice because I'm trying to think when I really started listening. It was probably like November or December, and then I kind of went back and listened to some older episodes as well. But I appreciate that you put the metrics within the context of what's going on in the world and what's going on with miners and other events and, conferences or any other things. Like, you put all the pieces together to where it's not in a bubble. It's not in a vacuum. Like, here's numbers that don't mean anything.
Yeah. Bitcoin is a fractal of the real world. So, what goes on in Bitcoin is going on everywhere, and everything affects everything else.
Definitely. Now, how long have you been doing the Bitcoin and Markets podcast?
Oh man, I should go back and look at my first episode. I think it's getting close to 2 years. It's getting close to 2 years. Yeah. I have, I think 110 shows.
Okay. And then you've recently started this other thing, Bitcoin is Freedom. That's kind of about, what would the world look like if, or you describe it, because I'm gonna kind of fumble over it. What is your intention here?
Well, it started by looking for a way to monetize the show, and I'll be totally honest with that, because it's like I said, there's a lot of new podcasters coming out, and a lot of people are looking for ways to monetize the show. So I was like, hey, Patreon looks good. I follow a few people on YouTube that I support on Patreon. So I thought, hey, this could be a way to at least make the wife happy, show that I'm bringing in a little bit from this activity that I was doing so much. So, and then we're trying to, Jeff and I, he's a friend from the local meetup here, and he and I were trying to decide on a show format, like what we could do it on. And we both got into Bitcoin from the anarchy side, from the kind of sound, me more sound money, but at least both from the libertarian anarchy side. So it was just kind of a natural fit. Like, why are we all here? Oh, well, because Bitcoin is freedom. So that's where that came from.
I don't know which came first for me, like the liberty stuff. I think it kind of all happened at the same time. I don't know. I actually had worked a couple of jobs within the university system here and just saw how inefficient government does things. And so, yeah. And then now I work in healthcare. So again, it's still the same thing. I don't work directly for the government, but I just see how they screw up everything. And so I think I was just kind of poised and I hit all the things at the same time. But,
well, Bitcoin woke you up. Is that what you're saying?
Well, I don't know. And it's funny because I think it's the same friend of mine that introduced me both to Bitcoin and things like Rothbard. Okay. And it was kind of all at the same time. So I don't know. It all worked together.
Definitely.
I've seen you said this on Twitter multiple times, and you kind of talked about it in the show. We need to defund these people. Speaking of the government, let's talk about kind of why, because I don't know. I think when you say that within the Bitcoin space, people kind of get it, but there's a lot of people that don't get it. Just in the day to day, like you go to work. Which actually, real quick, I assume you have a different job when you say that you're trying to monetize the podcast, and I feel like everyone I talk to in Bitcoin is working like 2 or 3 jobs and a project. So, what's your background?
Well, I was in college and I got a degree in economics with the emphasis in math. And that was right after 9/11. And I was a constitutionalist, libertarian, minarchist type back then. So I was like, okay, I'm going to go into the military and support the Constitution and our way of life, right? Well, so I did that for 10 years. Took me 10 years to get out. I very quickly understood that we weren't here for the American people. We were here for somebody else, and the powers that be, etc. So, I got out as fast as I could, which happened to be 10 years because of the commitment that I got for my certain job that I had. And since then during that time in the military, I was deployed a lot, and I missed my first 3 kids. I missed their childhood, like at least the first major events in their life, like when they start crawling and when they start walking and all that stuff. So, when I got out, I was like, okay, I'm going to stay at home. I look for jobs, like not with my heart in it to find a job, but my wife had a good job. So, she went to work and I stayed home with the kids for a while. That was the plan. And with Bitcoin doing so well, and this is my passion in life. So I stuck with this. And so I do Bitcoin full time, but I'm also a dad. We also had a son, my first son, last year. So I stay home with him, and it's pretty awesome that's my first time, even though it's my 4th kid, that's my first time seeing the crawling first and the walking and stuff like that. The major events. Yeah,
that's a big deal, man. I've got 2, and kids are awesome. But
yeah, and I like to talk about my kids. I mean, some people, I know the argument about you don't want to expose your kids because, let's face it, if Bitcoin goes to $1 million, there could be some danger. Your family could be in danger, but I think it's really important to spread the messages that you believe in. And I believe in family. I believe in sound money and, everything that comes from that. And so we'll get into the government stuff, but I like to share stuff about my family too.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good point, because I think it's easy for people to dismiss, like, oh, you're a crazy, Unabomber or something like that if you think that the government's the problem. And it's like, no, you can be a normal person who loves their family and wants to provide for their kids and, doesn't want their kids to be, I don't know, militant, crazy people. Like, you can be a normal person and recognize that the government is not the solution. Yeah.
And I know we're getting off topic here on Bitcoin, but for example, like this down market was actually really good. I liked it because it got so crazy last year, right? In 2017, it was just, you couldn't fight people off with a stick that wanted to get in and asking you advice on how to buy and all these things. But this down market, it's like crickets now. I mean, my local meetup went from 25 people every single week, every Sunday we meet up, down to 4. And
wow,
so that gave me time to, I planted a garden with my kids, right? And so you got to have the yin and the yang. And I think the anarchy perspective kind of, you'll find a lot of people like that in the anarchy side.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, anyway.
Sorry, I derailed this.
No, that's fine. No, that's totally fine. So let's go back to kind of, we can talk a little bit about, why we need to defund the government. Certainly, I guess you've got the perspective from the military. Is there anything in particular, or you have other things as well?
Well, I've seen the worst. I think. I mean, obviously, people have seen much worse than I have because I was in the Air Force, so I didn't see a lot of this stuff firsthand. But I've been exposed to the worst, and it's the government doesn't have a soul. That's the big thing on all aspects, like not even just warfare, but how they take care of you. Like you said, you work in healthcare system. Well, they're not really in the business of healthcare. They're in the business of treatment. So they want to extend your illness so that they can make more money, selling you pharmaceuticals and stuff. I mean, anything you look at in life, the government is they're pitted against you. They're pitted against the individual.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, I mean, from my experience, like I said, I worked in things that were not healthcare previously, and it was just like everything the government touches, they do super inefficiently. Yeah. And you kind of talk about efficiency as a big issue.
Yeah.
And then when I got into healthcare, I realized because the biggest payers in the healthcare system are Medicare and Medicaid, and just the things that they will and won't pay for are ridiculous. Going back to the kind of the military thing, I've taken care of multiple patients who are veterans coming out of surgery, coming out of anesthesia, and they've got PTSD, and they can't help it, but they're waking up thinking they're back in the middle of Afghanistan or Iraq, that they've been attacked, and it's just like, this is what we have to show for 17 plus years of meddling and stuff that we, this is not about 9/11.
No, absolutely not. Yeah, it's a tragedy. I mean, I'm not for the military anymore. I mean, I'm for the individuals there, and I think that it's tragic how they've been taken in by the lies and destroyed. Their whole psyche has been destroyed. A huge percentage of the homeless in this country are vets, just because they are like that. They have constant nightmares. They wake up, they can't trust anybody. They have massive PTSD, and we don't blame the right people, right? We blame the terrorists when we should be blaming the dude in the White House. So,
right. Yeah, exactly. It's like, here are people who were willing to give up their life to protect everyone else, but they were sent over there that's what they thought they were doing, and that's not really why they were there.
Right.
Yeah, I guess that's probably sufficient. And I mean, we could go on and talk about social welfare programs and things like that, and how they don't actually help the people, but they create a state of dependence as well. I don't know. You could pick any I'm kind of at the point where I'm like, pick an area that the government's involved in, and I could probably figure out a way that it's not helpful and it's detrimental to the people involved.
Oh, definitely. I mean, and it's, I like anarchy because it's holistic. It's not only a complete concept philosophically, but it's every piece works with every other piece, and you're not trying to fix a market failure. That's what they always tell you, is the market fails, and so we have to intervene here or there. And that's because you're intervening. For every time you intervene, you create 2 more market failures, quote unquote market failures. But it's just because you are causing the problem. Anarchy teaches you that everything works properly, just like a well-functioning ecosystem. The market is the same way. And there's evolution in the market. So you just got to the government makes everything worse.
Right. And some of it too is, people, I think, here you talk about anarchy, and I say I just mean in general, someone talk about anarchy and they think that means like there's no rules to society. Like you're Kurt Russell in Escape from New York or Escape from LA or whatever. It's like, no, it's not, a bunch of trash can fires with the letter A painted across the walls. Like there are rules. There's just not rulers. Right. And I don't know. There's something else I was going to say. Now I forgot. Oh man. Oh, it's a consistent thing, right? So it's like like you said, you're not trying to figure out how to explain this one aspect that doesn't really work, because I think when you start down the rabbit hole of libertarianism, it's like, oh, well, yeah, we need to get the government out of all these other areas, but we'll make this exception because we don't understand how could you do police, or how could you do, without, more roads or whatever. It's like, at some point, I think if you keep going, you just realize like, anarchy is actually the most consistent way of doing it, and just let people figure it out.
Yeah. And it all comes back to fiat money, right? Because like, okay, the government can't have all these welfare programs if they can't pay for it. Well, in the past, on the gold standard with sound money, honest money, they couldn't just spend to infinity. They had some check, and they had to in some way earn that ability to spend. But with fiat money, it's like unchecked. So you put the psychopaths that want to control everything, you put them in power, and you give them a blank checkbook. I mean, you're just asking for really bad things to happen.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, it's not like there's a physical printing. I mean, there is to some extent a physical printing press, because they, when dollar bills get trashed and stuff, they have a certain rate that they replace those with. But, it's because it's so digital now anyways, that they just, the Fed loans it out to the banks or whatever, and then it gets dispersed again on a multiplier. And I think people don't get that's actually already happening.
Yeah, it's a pyramid scheme. Kind of everything's stacked on top of the last one and doubled down. And I just listened to a really good there's the Mises Institute.
Right. Yeah. I'm actually going later this year.
Oh, really?
So
cool.
I'm excited about that.
Cool. Yeah. They have on SoundCloud, they have a stream where I think they also do videos on YouTube, but I listened to the audio version just today about this, man, I forget her name now, but she talked about Bitcoin and a little bit of blockchain. I don't want to get into blockchain, but she talked about Bitcoin, and she also based it on the traditional finance system and how broken it is. We often think, okay, there's a printing press, and then you learn, well, it's not really a printing press. They loan out more than the deposits that they have. So they kind of create money out of nothing. But then she was talking about also the repo market for U.S. Treasury bills is a huge way that the Federal Reserve directly creates money. So I have to go and study up on that. But there's just so many ways that the government and their lackeys, the cronies, how they create money out of thin air.
Okay, that's really interesting. Send me that link later, and I'll put that in the show notes. I don't know what episode this is. 16, I think. Bottomshelfbitcoin.com/16 will be all the show notes. And so we'll put that link in there because I want to check that out too. Okay, so then with that transition, how do we use Bitcoin to defund the state? How do we opt out?
How do we use it to defund? Well, okay, a little bit goes a long way. In Bitcoin, the market is relatively shallow, right? If you put $10,000 into some stock on the stock market, you're not going to move the price. But in Bitcoin, you actually could move the price a little bit, even with that small amount of money. It would be for a very short time. But let's say 1,000 people just decide to put $10,000 in, you're going to be moving the market already. So it just takes a little bit to go a long way. And then people start chasing rabbits. This is one of Trace Mayer's biggest points that he talks about a lot with, why is everybody investing in altcoins? Well, because people chase rabbits. They see the price going up and then they buy in. It's the same thing if Bitcoin starts mooning, people are going to buy in to Bitcoin too. And, the price will just keep going up in longer term cycles. I think this one was pretty long, but I think the next one could be the big one. We'll see what happens. But so as you're doing that, you're also diverting investment into the traditional markets. You're bidding down the price of the dollar. And as you bid down the price, as enough people bid down the price of the dollar and you divert money away from the stock market and the bond market, you're going to make a sizable impact. And it only takes a small amount of people at this point right now. In the future, when the market's deeper and it's more liquid, of course, it's going to take a lot more to move the market. But we're not talking about billions of dollars to move the market. We're talking millions of dollars. So I think just that little bit that everybody can put in $100 a month or whatever they can afford, and you can actually start hurting the traditional financial system, hurting the dollar. And when that happens, the government has to cut back, or we've seen a couple shutdowns now in the past couple of years. Maybe the government has longer shutdowns and they start having financial problems. And finally, as this whole snowball gets rolling, then there's a Bitcoin electorate. That's going to be the final check on government, like getting really totalitarian is eventually, like, let's say, I think I've seen statistics saying like 3 or 4% of the US owns Bitcoin now. If you can get that number up to 15 or 20%, it's going to be really hard to do anything against Bitcoin. You know what I mean?
Oh, okay. I see. When you're saying electorate, you're talking about like it's hard for them to pass legislation because it's spread out across enough people that they're going to push back.
Yeah, people will vote them out, or the 20% of the population can make a credible threat, where 2% really can't make a credible threat.
And all of this is kind of with a hodler mindset, though, right? I mean, it doesn't do you any good to buy it and then sell it again when it goes high, because you're putting that money back, the money then is going back in. Plus now you're paying capital gains taxes.
Right. Yeah. Hodlers have a different goal in mind. So they want to hold it long term and never cash out. They want to hold it until they can, till it becomes their daily use money. And so, yeah, that's what I would say.
It's the Matrix meme where Neo says, "You're telling me I can sell my Bitcoin for millions," and Morpheus says, "I'm telling you, when the time's right, you won't have to."
Well, I talk about this with Jeff every now and then on the show. Is well, because I think we were talking about the housing market one time, and he was trying to tell me like a quarter of a Bitcoin would buy a house. I'm like, dude, you're going to be able to buy a house for 1/10 of a Bitcoin one day. So I don't know. That's what hodlers have in mind. They don't have in mind making fiat gains.
Yeah, this was something that kind of took me a while to get, and I wish I'd gotten it several years ago, because I bought a little Bitcoin back out of 13, 14, but I wasn't really paying attention to it too much. And I just kind of looked at it like I thought, hey, this will be really cool if one day it takes off, but I didn't know it was going to happen so quick, relatively speaking. I thought another 10 years from now, it'll be up to a couple of $1,000s. And it's just like, I was checking the price, I guess last year, periodically. And it's like, oh, this just keeps going up. And now I can't buy in. And then just talking to people, and it's like, stop trying to time the markets. It's never going to work for you. This thing is going to take over. Just start accumulating.
Right. I had a guy, he was an Indian immigrant, and he came to the meetup, and yeah, I think the price was like 16,000 or something, and he had to buy. And I told him, no. I was like, don't wait, dude, or don't do it now. Wait, just wait, man. It's going parabolic right now. Just wait. And he couldn't wait. And he ended up, he bought like 1/10 of one. I was like, that's good, man. That's good. Just do that and then scale in as it goes down and stuff. But no, he ended up buying, I think he probably got like almost at the top of the market. And
oh man.
So yeah, you can wait. I mean, it's the whole Bitcoin revolution is going to happen a lot faster than we think, especially coming from the gold bug side, which I did, man, that's a long fight. People have been fighting the gold fight for 40 years, right? And so it feels like it's never coming. And in that, relative to that, Bitcoin's going to happen in a blink of an eye. So some people, you want to be smart about it, but at the same time, you can wait a month and then buy. You don't have to be like, I need to get it right now today. That'll drive you crazy. That's when you know it's at the top.
Yeah, well, that's the FOMO.
Right, yeah.
I guess the ultimate ideal would then be to work in some kind of job where you get paid in Bitcoin, because then you're not having to go through the exchange process.
Yeah, that would be ideal for many people.
But then again, and I think a lot of people with the hodler mentality say like, oh, we're not, Bitcoin's not about coffee, although we can do it now because Lightning. But well, that video is circulating out there on Twitter now. But to some extent, then it shouldn't be all about merchant adoption and everybody being able to accept it, but shouldn't we press a little bit for a little more merchant adoption?
I know. I don't think we need to push for merchant adoption. I think we need to build tools, and that's what an entrepreneur will do, right? Is they'll risk and build tools for these merchants, or they will become a merchant themselves and offer services or products for Bitcoin. But that's the market will take care of that, and we don't need to go out and get people to adopt. It's going to be a natural thing, in my opinion.
So you think okay? So you're saying, I'm gonna see if I can reword this and correct me if I'm wrong. What you're saying is, if we build the right tools and we just keep at it, then as the price goes up, more and more merchants will want to accept it on their own without having to go out and preach this to them.
Yeah, everybody's going to want Bitcoin. Everybody. Look out on the street when you're driving down the road and you're in traffic. Just look around at you. Nobody owns Bitcoin yet, but they all will want it. And so if they own a business, they're going to accept Bitcoin. So I don't, it's just like almost like an inevitable thing. You just let it happen, and everybody's going to want Bitcoin, and everybody will eventually accept it. You don't have to worry about it. But I mean, the thing is, it's a misconception. People think that value comes from spending, but value doesn't come from spending. The value in Bitcoin is going to end up coming from the traditional market falling apart and draconian measures and things like Venezuela or the Italian banking crisis. Or right now, I think this year alone, Turkey has I think it's Turkish lira is their currency, has lost 50% of its value. So Those are the type of things that are going to push people into Bitcoin. And we don't have to, and it's like I said, it's a very small amount. If $1 billion came into Bitcoin in the next month, the price would moon drastically.
Yeah.
So it just takes a small amount to make a big difference.
So what do you see, you kind of talked about crackdowns and things like that. Did you see recently, and I'll put the link to this in the show notes, but I saw a thing where Australia banned transactions over $10,000, cash transactions over $10,000, which I'm like, if it's private parties, how are you regulating that anyways? That's kind of stupid, but I guess you can't go buy a car from a used dealership in cash. I don't know how their car dealerships work over there, but, do you think things like this are going to push people more into Bitcoin or scare people off of it?
Oh, it's absolutely going to push people more into Bitcoin. Anytime you put limits on use of money, people wake up, right? If you, like in the United States, at least I have in the past, dealt with ATM withdrawal limits. Like I needed the cash, but I could only withdraw, $600 from the ATM or something. And even though it's my money, and if you go
Right.
into the bank and you try to withdraw money, they don't, like a big sum of money, say $10,000 above or something like that. Then you have to go through all these steps, and you probably can't get it that day, and all these things. So the more hurdles you put in people's way, the more they're going to look for a better solution. So yeah, this thing in Australia, I don't really know the details of it, but it's probably just a typical government crackdown like we saw last year in India and all that.
Yeah, I think I'll have to go find the article again, but I think it was an effort to limit drug stuff or something, equally as stupid. So what do you see as potential attack vectors in the U.S.? I mean, they've been so far pretty hands off as far as legislation. Now there's been individual cities or states, New York had the bit license thing. But what do you see coming down the road potentially?
I think it could continue. I think you've heard me talk in the past about the generational battle that's coming, and I'll touch on that the second half of this answer. But I think it'll continue kind of light touch, but they're going to do more KYC. They're going to do all the stuff that you are used to in banking because people are used to that, and it won't make that many waves. They're not going to like outright ban it or anything like that. And then Wall Street's going to try to financialize it. So they're going to have derivatives on it. They're going to try to push the price down, use it for, have some sort of product that they can fractional reserve so that it feels like the supply is higher than it really is. We'll see all types of attacks like that. But my boy's crying. Sorry if you can hear that. What was it? No, what did I say the second half of my answer was? No, I forgot it.
Something about the generational attack.
Oh yeah. Okay. So the generational attack is, it's not really an attack. It's that, pensioners that are about to get their pension, or they might have like the baby boomer generation. It's a huge, block of people that are going to be retiring here in the next few years. And Bitcoin's going to come in, and they're going to be able to blame, the government's going to be able to blame Bitcoin for why they can't get their pension, or why their pension is worthless now. And so these boomers are going to almost outright attack these Bitcoiners, and it's going to be a very hostile environment. But at the same time, you're going to have this Bitcoin electorate that can stand up for itself. So there's going to be, I can even see like major political divide, that Bitcoin is one of these hot button issues that's talked about in elections and things. It's going to be pretty big.
Yeah. It's something I've got several coworkers in my department who are getting very close to retirement age. And it's like, I feel like I've made progress by helping them be able to use Amazon to shop for things from their phone, and I don't mean that in an ugly way, but that's just where they were when I started working there. It's like, that was scary to them, and they honestly, they have made progress in that area, but they, to even begin to explain Bitcoin to them would, I just think, be such a hard thing for them to understand. My parents don't get it. I've tried explaining it to them. They don't really get it. And, I try and say things to my coworkers like, you need to be careful about your 401k and stuff, because, it's been enough time. It's been 10 years, like we're headed for another downturn in the market. It's coming. I'm telling you, but they just, I don't know. They don't see it.
Well, that part of their critical thinking is shut off, right? They've been programmed for so long that they can't question certain assumptions, or else like their whole psyche would crumble. So I think Bitcoin is there, but it is at the same time, it's a huge red pill for the younger people. And like we saw with Giancarlo from the CFTC, and he said, we owe it to our kids to not poo-poo this whole crypto thing and to give it, this is the next generation and this is what they are interested in. So there are going to be some people like that, but it's definitely going to be a generational divide. I have some other attacks that I can talk about here if you want me to go into those.
Yeah, absolutely. Real quick though, there was something else I was going to say. I'm sure you've seen, I know Illinois is an example. I think there's other places too. They already have so much in unfunded liabilities for these pensions. You were talking about pensions earlier, so that's what made me think of it.
Yeah.
But it's like they're already having problems with it. But I agree, they're probably going to try and blame Bitcoin because Bitcoin is going to end up being like the tipping point for that stuff, I think.
Yeah, it's a good scapegoat, right? Because
Yeah.
people don't understand it. So, oh, it's evil. And that's easy to get people to think that. And there's a lot of people, I talked about on the show, there's people mistake, what did I say? Nationalism for freedom, or they equate nationalism and freedom,
Yeah.
especially in the United States. This is really bad. I mean, the flag waving people, and this is coming from a vet, right? Like the flag waving people, they will kill you if you say something bad about the government or something bad about the United States. And if they demonize Bitcoin, those flag waving people will easily turn on Bitcoiners. So it's a little bit scary, but at the same time, everything, at least in our lifetimes, worries have been overblown, and hopefully we're doing that now. Sorry to jump around on you here.
No, that's all right.
I have attack vectors. So Bitcoin is very secure. There's not a lot of attack vectors out there for Bitcoin, at least code wise, because it's so decentralized, and we shot down the biggest kind of attacks last year when they tried to place security bugs into the code. That's what I believe all those things were last year. I agree with JW. He said that all these hard forks they're just trying to weaken the security of Bitcoin somehow. And they're predicated on a social attack vector. So that the code is super, super secure, but human beings are the weak link in all security, right? When hackers try to hack into a big company, they try to fool a human being. And then they get that human being to give you their password somehow, or, they trick the human. That's the weak link. So,
right.
That's what how they've been trying to attack Bitcoin. And so podcasts like mine and like yours here that are education focused, information focused, those are super, super valuable.
So
That's
do you
all I
think
got for
that you think that you and I are putting ourselves at risk then to some extent?
I think so. Yeah, I do. I think so. I mean, I'm not a whale, and I openly say that I'm not a whale. I mean, I could have bought at Mt. Gox way back in the day, but they wanted too much information. And so I said, screw that. Right. But, I'm not a whale. I don't own a ton of Bitcoin, and, we are in danger somewhat, but no, I do worry about the family thing, like I said at the beginning sometimes, but you just got to be brave. I mean, this is what men are about, standing up for what they believe in and being freedom fighters. That's what I kind of picture myself as. You got to stand up for the truth and be a man sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's people who are doing far more in far more restrictive places. So,
Absolutely.
yeah, I'm not really worried about, not yet anyways. There might come a point where I worry a little more about it, but I'm not worried right now. But,
yeah, so I didn't mean to sound like super important or anything, but I think that people that are in the public eye, at least, and that's what we're doing by doing podcasts, and we are in the limelight. But who I'm really scared for, honestly, are the core developers.
Absolutely.
And I'm glad that Bitcoin is kind of getting to the point where it can't be upgraded anymore, because then they'll be safe. You know what I mean? Yeah.
I kind of am concerned for people like, Jimmy Song, who's out there educating people on how to develop it, or, other people that are devs. I mean, so that brings up something that I've considered as like a potential attack vector, is like, what if they, try and get somebody in the NSA or whatever in as a core dev, to work on the code, right? And then just slowly start pushing it towards something that makes it easier for them to mess around with.
Yeah, some people will say Gavin Andresen was that person already, because a lot of people think he was compromised, and I don't. I think it's worthwhile to talk about that, but there's no proof of anything like that. He did talk to the CIA early on, right before Satoshi left. Actually, he said his last communication with Satoshi was, "I'm going to the CIA to give him a brief on Bitcoin." So that's a possible attack vector, but that's why we have this long, drawn out process, peer review everything in and out. And I tell you, these cypherpunks, these guys, the core developers, the thinkers, they've been thinking about this for decades, and it's very hard to pull one over on them.
What do you think? Do you think things like altcoins are an attack?
I don't think they're all consciously an attack.
Okay.
But I do think that they are in effect attacks on Bitcoin. Yes.
More like a trial.
Yeah, trial. And first, I mean, this is a by no means do I think that I know the answers to all of these questions, but this is just my current understanding.
Speculating to some extent here.
Yeah, because I mean, in the past, I was like, when I first got in, I remember like 2013, 2014, I was blockchain. And the other day I was looking on the internet at I typed in blockchain and I looked at on the images, on Google, you could look at the images for that word. And like, there are all these diagrams and things. And like, that's what I was drawing back in 2014. Because I was like trying to understand like how, this is blockchain, everything, decentralize everything. And so you grow and you learn more. And so this is my current understanding. I think that altcoins, a lot of them are outright scams. Total 100% IOTA. It's a 100% scam. Paycoin, 100% scam. Bcash, 100% scam. But there are some that they're honestly trying. They don't mean any ill will, but it does kind of delay Bitcoin's adoption a little bit. So when these engineers and the developers, whatever, they could be working on Bitcoin or Lightning or whatever, they're working on their silly altcoin that's not going to go anywhere. So it's a waste is what it is. Maybe not an attack is the wrong word, but it is a complete waste.
Yeah, I can see that. Yeah, it's a waste because like you said, they could be working on something beneficial to Bitcoin.
Yeah, and another thing too is that I used to think that altcoins were test beds, like you find out something that works, and then it can come into Bitcoin because it's open source, and if it's valuable, Bitcoin will adopt it. But nothing really has. The only thing that people can say somewhat that might have come from an altcoin is the user activated soft fork, because it was first used in Litecoin, but it wasn't proposed first in Litecoin. It was proposed first in Bitcoin. It was just used first in Litecoin. So that's like the only thing people can really point to that Bitcoin used as an innovation. And when they asked Dr. Back, like maybe a couple months ago, somebody asked him on camera, they're like, is there anything that you see out there in the altcoin space that you find interesting at all? And he said, no.
That was it? Just no?
Yeah, pretty much. It was like one or two words, not really, or something like that. Yeah.
That's funny. Well, and he's one of those guys that's been around doing this stuff since before Bitcoin was Bitcoin too.
Yeah, he's part of the history. Yep.
Do you think, because this is something that, I don't know if you know who Dave Smith is, but I've kind of been listening to him, and he's been talking not from a Bitcoin side at all, just from a political standpoint about states seceding and, the U.S. breaking up. Do you think that there's going to come a point, as the federal government is unable to kind of maintain their reputation, do you see any states seceding and saying, you know what, we're going to be done with this. You can't control it anymore. We're going to take back over, and we're just going to separate and cut our, because we don't want to be saddled with your debt.
I think that's a really good question to ask, because I do think that government will get more local. The sound money, hard money of Bitcoin, you'll see the breakup of most of these nation states to more local type government, and secession fits right in there. I don't think, though, that it's going to be really a choice. I think one day, kind of like the lights in Washington, D.C. don't come on. And so then in Austin, they're sitting there like, well, shit, what do we do, guys? I guess we're seceding. Like somebody's got to pick up the torch, right? And that's going to happen in all the state capitals. And then very quickly they'll be like, well, shit, what do we do? There's no financial system, or, whatever the case is. I think it's going to be more similar to that than a state actually forcefully seceding from the union. But if there is one, I do think it's Texas. I mean, they, being in the military, it's like, God, it might not be as high as 25%, but there's at least 10% of the entire military is from Texas. So
yeah, if we got a lot of people, but sorry to interrupt you real quick. The only because I've thought about that before, and because I live in Texas, and I was just like, I think Texas has enough resources on its own. It's got enough, Houston, Dallas, Austin, San Antonio, enough big cities and enough universities and whatever to have the various job. It's got oil, it's got all these things to survive. I don't know how well we'd thrive on our own, but crap, where was I going with that? But like things like we also have Fort Hood, right? So it's like, I don't know that we would be able to just say like, we're done, it's over, take your federal stuff and get out. Because I think having Fort Hood, there's also bases in San Antonio as well, where we couldn't do it today. Let's just say there would have to be much less federal backing.
Oh yeah. There's tons of forts and Air Force bases all over that state. But I think it doesn't matter if you have all the bases covered. Like, you don't have to be self-sufficient to benefit from freedom and benefit from the government getting smaller, right? So you look at Singapore, right? They are horribly not self-sufficient, but they thrive. And you just need freedom. That's all you need.
Yeah, I would consider moving to Singapore if they would let me bring my guns, but so I was going to say, something that you and Jeff had kind of brought up in one of the episodes, y'all were talking about, were there things that I think it was something to the effect of like, what are some other things that we could do well without the government? And I was gonna bring up charities, and like, I think we've done a lot of harm in this country with the way that the government has stepped in. I think with social programs and stuff, you can look at data, but like church involvement in the community and, like the Elk Lodge or whatever, these fraternal organizations that used to do these charitable things, they're all drying up because it's easier for people to just go stand in line at the office, the government office, and get it. And so there's not really any point for them anyway. I mean, churches still obviously have, our faith side of things, but as far as being able to reach out in the community, people are more resistant to that because they don't want to have any kind of strings attached. But I think if we moved back off of the government system, you'd be able to see more of that kind of stuff that really helps people and says like, hey, yeah, like, let me help you here, but there's also this other area of your life that like you're sabotaging yourself. Let us kind of come alongside you and help you realize that.
Yeah, I think that's a good example. Charity we're still pretty charitable, but I do think that we will know our neighbors more. We will be more close with our local communities and less worried about New York City, right? And one of our shows, we talked about the cultural. I don't even know if we've actually put that one out yet. So we're about to put out an episode on the cultural consequences of fiat money. And it was from a Mises Institute lecture that we watched, and then we commented on it. But I mean, it's through all phases of society, or all places in society is this cultural consequence of fiat money, and charity is a really good example. You have the nanny state, so you don't you might not take care of that guy that you see struggling because he can go to the government, and maybe you're even told that that is the proper role for government. Your role is not to look out for your fellow man. Your goal is to go to work, make money so you can buy shit for your kids that they don't need, right? And when we have a hard money, sound money thing, we have better morals, better ethics. We do take care of our neighbors more. So I agree with you. I think charity will skyrocket.
Yeah. And I think, if someone says, the other side, not just that like there's this expectation of, well, that's the government's job, but because the government has done it, you go, well, the government's already taking 30% of my check or whatever it is. Like, it's hard for me to pull more out of what I'm spending for me and my family or whatever. And I think if you're not paying taxes, or even if we had a greatly reduced tax burden, it's like, hey, I have more of my own money now to go and help people in the way that I see fit. That's more efficient than what they're doing with it.
Great point. And you can help them get on their feet easier. Now it's, you don't, what is your option? You can take them to a shelter or something, or, they put them into the system basically. But, in a future where we don't have fiat money and your community is tighter, there's going to be the community safety net. Maybe they have a way to get them a job, right? And so you take them to the church, and the church has connections to get this guy a job, or this girl or whatever. Take care of the homeless kids if they have kids. And so there's going to be much better productive safety net for those people, I believe.
Cool. Okay, so real quick, how do you help friends or family out of the cult of statism? Because I have a coworker that's like, we agree on a lot of things, and then it's like you start talking about Bitcoin, and there's just a disconnect, and she just, I'm not trying to call her out. I know she's not going to listen to this, but anyway, but there's just this, and it's not just her, it's a lot of people. When you get down to it, and they'll agree with you about, oh yeah, the government's inefficient, and they'll agree with you to a certain point, and then you just go, okay, but then why don't we just get rid of it? Like, why? They're lying to you, and they're not using your money the right way. And there's a point where they go, well, I just have to believe that they're trying to do the right thing.
Yeah, well, that's kind of what we touched on earlier. They've shut off that part of their brain, that's critical thinking. On Twitter, this guy just today, because I said something about why would we trust the biggest scammers to actually be the regulators, right? Because
I saw that. The
government, you have Social Security is a scam, WMD in Iraq is a scam, the Federal Reserve is a scam. It's the biggest scams are run by the government. So why would we trust them to police other scams? It just doesn't make any sense. So some guy said, but we need something like, we need the government to look at, or no, who's going to do it if not the government? And before I even started the conversation, I was like, okay, first we need to agree that the government is the worst choice, because if we can't agree on that, then it's gonna be a circle fight, back and forth. So we have to set the principle right. The very first thing you need to agree on is the government sucks, and that it is inefficient and it makes everything worse. Now we agree on that. Now we can try to figure out a way to solve it. Maybe that's wrong, but I think really sticking to your guns about that, of first agreeing at the very beginning. That's also in rhetorical argument. You want to get them to agree to something at the beginning before you try to convince them of something else.
Yeah, I've heard another way is like, okay, well, do people have rights, and where do those rights come from? Because if, does a person say they just pop up in some random country that doesn't have any established government, say there's wild wilderness or whatever, do they have human rights? Well, yeah, they do. So then the rights don't come from the government, and I think that's another good place to start from.
Yeah, freedom of speech too. Everybody kind of believes in freedom of speech, so drill down on that a little bit.
All right, recommended books. If you had to pick the top, 3 to 5 books that you would recommend that you think everybody needs to read.
Okay, so typical Austrian stuff is Rothbard, A New Liberty. You probably have had other people talk about that one. The Bitcoin Standard, obviously. The new Saifedean Ammous's book. It's really, really good. It's an Austrian book, so you can get a lot of that Austrian background by reading the Bitcoin Standard. Also, another one, if you're a big reader and you like history and stuff like that, Rothbard has another one called The History of Economic Thought, and it's several volumes, so it's a pretty big read, but it's fascinating going with Rothbard throughout the history of money and thought, in the Western world. So that's good. And then the last thing I'll say is do your own research. Google cypherpunks. Google, things about Bitcoin, and do reading on the past. Go into Bitcoin Talk and look back at the early conversations. Get on, the archives of the mailing list and read what those guys said. I mean, it's really dry, obviously, but for people that are really curious, it's a fascinating adventure that you go on when you start reading about the history of the internet, the history of the cypherpunks, and what this whole era really meant. And finally, I want to say that I believe that the market, Bitcoin, the financial system, everything that we talk about, government, it's all part of a holistic whole, and everything affects everything else. So if you can kind of do your own research from that kind of perspective, I think you will gain a lot of insights. I hope that made sense.
Yeah, I think so. Okay, so how can people keep up with you?
On Twitter, Ansel Lindner, or you can find my podcast on SoundCloud, iTunes, Stitcher, all the main ones. I'm going to be soon possibly putting the Anarchy is Freedom onto my free stream, so that people will be able to hear past episodes and also new episodes of that show. So there'll be a double stream there.
Gotcha. But you guys should go to Patreon and support Ansel anyway, because he does good work. His show's good, and the other stuff on Patreon is good too. So, all right. Anything else you want to say?
No, thanks for having me on. It was great meeting you. I had a fun chat.
Yeah, this was awesome. Thanks for coming on. Okay, gang, that's all the interview we have time for today, because I have a few things I want to go over before we're done. If you want to hear the full-length version of that interview, I've made it available on my Patreon page at patreon.com/bottomshelfbitcoin. Anybody who signs up for a $5 per month plan gets access to that feed, and this is something I'm going to be starting doing probably, so that I don't have to cut as much content, or so that I can make full-length versions of these interviews I'm doing available if that's something you're interested in. I just want to reiterate something that Ansel and I went over about the military in that interview. When I originally scheduled and recorded that episode, or this episode about Anarchy, I didn't realize I would be releasing it the day after Memorial Day. And I realized that might seem insensitive to some people, and I'm sorry, but I'm doing it anyway. If you are listening outside of the US, this probably doesn't even matter to you. But in the US, we make a big deal out of Memorial Day. And, it's for all the soldiers who have died in various wars. And you'll hear this line repeated all the time. We have these freedoms because men and women gave their lives to protect them. And, like Ansel and I talked about, I think there are genuinely people who joined the military and joined up to fight in these various wars and battles because that's what they believed. I think their intention, I think they were well-meaning. But the reality is I don't accept that that's really what happened. Basically every U.S. war, every war that the U.S. has been involved in, almost all of them at least, didn't require the U.S. to be involved. You heard it yourself from Ansel. He said he was in the military for 10 years. And he realized very quickly that, they weren't going over there to protect American freedoms. The Army just recently promoted, I think it's 18th general over the war in Afghanistan. We've been there for basically 17 years. Think about that. Okay? There were boys being recruited to fight in these radical groups, to fight U.S. military, because their entire lives they've grown up seeing U.S. soldiers occupying their land. I'm not saying Al-Qaeda or the Taliban or Saddam or Assad or any of these people are noble people. I'm not saying they're good people. But what I'm saying is we've done nothing to make it better, and a lot of what we've done has made it worse. If you have more questions on that, I cannot recommend highly enough Scott Horton's book, Fool's Errand. That's about the war in Afghanistan, but it touches on Iraq a lot as well. He also has a show called The Scott and Horton Show. It's a podcast. So he talks to a lot of foreign policy experts and not the garbage that you see on CNN or Fox News or MSNBC, but like real people who've really been to these places. So you should check out his book, check out his show. It's good stuff. Honestly, I hesitate to say this because I realize this can really offend people, but and I'll probably get some flack for saying this, but we shouldn't have been in Vietnam. We shouldn't have been in Korea. We probably shouldn't have been in World War II, at least not the way it was done. And we're definitely not in World War I. I can recommend good resources if you're curious farther about my opinions on that and why I don't think we should have been involved in those. But basically every time the powers that be decide that they want to be involved in something, they make these big sweeping moral arguments like, oh, we have to go to these places, when it's about geopolitical influence and power and resources. It's not about freedom. It's definitely not about American freedom. That's a tragedy that we have friends and family and coworkers who have been sent willingly because they believed they were doing it for you and me, and they've been sent to kill and be killed for politicians so that our government can become more powerful, basically is the majority of what it is, or for special interest groups, or to sell more weapons for Lockheed Martin or Boeing or whatever this equipment is. It's the war machine, and that's what it's about. And it's not about your freedom and my freedom. If you have family or friends that have given their lives in war, I hope they meant well. But we've got to stop glorifying war, and we've got to stop pretending that it's about our freedom here at home when it's not. I think the best way that we can honor those who gave up their lives is to stop sending people into these pointless wars. It's to stop creating more dead soldiers for things that have nothing to do with freedom here at home. So that's what I'm going to say about that. Like I said, check out Scott Horton's stuff. I would hope that by now Vietnam is pretty obvious that we shouldn't have been there, that it was not something that the U.S. needed to get involved in. It really was about, the Red Scare and the fear that, if the Russians got involved or something like that, or if communism and socialism spread there, then it would just keep going to the whole world, which is just goofy. And we've seen, history has shown, in the countries that we did not stay involved in, socialism collapses. Look at Vietnam now. We lost. We were forced to pull out. And not too much longer, the communist socialist regime collapsed, right? It's not that way anymore. But look at Korea. Look, we still can't stop poking our noses in it, and we haven't fixed anything. So, anyways, yeah, I could go on about that. I'm going to save us both some time here. But seriously, if you want to know more about this stuff, message me. I can send you resources. I can post them or whatever if that's something you're interested in. But yeah, okay. Anyway, if you guys want to support the show and get extras like access to these full-length interviews, like I said, I think this is the way that I'm going to start going, is the stuff that has to get cut. I'm just going to go ahead and put the full versions up on Patreon if that's something you're interested in. Go to patreon.com/bottomshelfbitcoin. If you want to support me with Bitcoin or PayPal, go to bottomshelfbitcoin.com/donate. You can also buy books from the Tuttle Twins series about liberty and free market economics at bottomshelfbitcoin.com/kidsbook. And part of your purchase, it doesn't change the price, but part of your purchase goes to helping support the show. If you want to support in non-financial ways, you can go give us a good review on iTunes or Stitcher or any of those. You can share the episodes on Twitter or Facebook or Scuttlebutt or whatever social media you use. I'm not making that up. Scuttlebutt's a real one. You should check that out. And I've also started putting these episodes up on YouTube later in the week if you're the kind of person like my wife who likes to listen to the television instead of watching it. So there's no special graphics on YouTube. It's just my voice. So anyway, but if that's what you prefer to do, go check those out there. Like them, share them, whatever. All right, you are not going to want to miss our next episode. I've got self-proclaimed Bitcoin maximalist and president of the Satoshi Nakamoto Institute, Michael Goldstein, coming on to talk to us a little bit about Satoshi and about the Nakamoto Institute and kind of the history of Bitcoin, pre-Bitcoin, the forerunner programs and projects that led to this. So you don't want to miss that. Come back. For Bottom Shelf Bitcoin, I'm Josh Humphrey. Thanks for listening.